scripture this morning is Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 through 10. A reading from the prophet Jeremiah. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. And I said, Lord God, truly I do not know how to speak, for I am only a boy. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am only a boy, for you shall go to all to whom I send you, and you shall speak whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, says the Lord. Then the Lord put out his hand and touched my mouth, and the Lord said to me, Now I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to pull down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks, Jane. As we come into our prayer time today, we lift up prayer concerns from those of you in the congregation, and we want to lift these up. You're welcome to add these to your prayer list that is in your bulletin as you pray over these throughout the week. Mary Ann Miller would like us to pray for Margaret Green and her continued health issues, for Roy Smith, and also for Roger Miller, who's dealing with some body pain. So you please add Margaret Green, Roy Smith, and Roger Miller to your prayer list. And also, please pray for Jim Cipriano. He will be starting radiation treatment tomorrow. So Jim, I thought Jim was here today. Would you pray for him? Okay, there you are. We'll continue to pray for Jim as he starts radiation tomorrow. Larry and Kathy Hennekins would like us to pray for their son-in-law's mother, Eleanor Morningstar, in the hospital with various illnesses. So please add Eleanor Morningstar to your prayer list. Beth McCall would like to ask for prayers for answers and healing for Wayne on Wednesday. He's going to the Shane's Movement Disorder Clinic. So please add Wayne McCall to your prayer list. And also, the Elfrings would like us to pray for Caitlin Peltz, who's continuing chemo after a tumor was removed, bone cancer tumor. So please add Caitlin Peltz to your prayer list. And the Dinkins would like us to pray for Donna and Jack Davis, who are both battling cancer. So those are some of our prayer quote recipients. So just please keep them in your prayers and add them to your prayer list if they're not there already. Would you please join me in prayer? Lord God, we lift up these names before you. Some names of joy, some names of sorrow, some names of anticipation. Lord, we ask that you would be with all of these on our prayer list. Help us to realize that compassion is not relegated to agencies in our society, but is instead our job. Lord, you ask us to never turn our back on someone in need, giving that responsibility to someone else. Lord, help us. Heal us from our selfish ways. Heal our hardened hearts. Forgive us again as you have so often before. Help us to become involved in ministries of peace and justice right where we are. For there is nowhere in creation where your love is not needed. Let us bring messages of hope and love to all people. Bring to us an understanding of the partnership of healing and hope that comes in your service. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Our second reading comes from the Gospel according to Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. This occurs in the section of Luke as Jesus is walking towards Jerusalem. He has set his face, we're told, in chapter 9, to walk towards Jerusalem. And in this particular day, he's teaching in a synagogue. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things he was doing. The word of God for the people of God. Praise be to God. Will you pray with me and for me? Lord, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord. May my words be yours as we enter this holy time. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Now, Jeremiah and Jesus both encounter situations where people are saying, sometimes it's Jeremiah himself in one case, in Jesus it's the leader of the synagogue. It's said that what they're doing is not appropriate. What God is doing here in this situation is not appropriate. It doesn't fit within the bounds of the box in which we understand God to live. Jeremiah protests, "But I'm too young. I'm only a boy. God, what are you doing?" And God still takes him on, gives him an amazing mission and a call. And through this little boy, who considers himself a boy, God grows him up and turns him into an amazing messenger. Now, we should know, if we've read just a few pages of the Bible, that there are a few things you never tell God. One of them is, I'm too young, or I'm too old, or I'm unable to do it. Moses said, I'm not a smooth talker. I have a speech impediment. I can't make words that persuade people. God says, so what? Or to tell God, I'm too poor. I don't have enough resources. I'm not that important. Amos says, I'm a dresser of sycamore trees. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a high-wage occupation. Never known sycamore trees enjoying being dressed. Whatever that means. But God still uses him. The call sets him free to do what God created him to do. As we read about God forming him in the womb and God saying, I'm not calling you now, Jeremiah. You realize I called you back before you even existed. I had this in mind the whole time. This is my call on your life. Run from it all you can. It's still there. The call sets him free. Because at this point, he's doing what God created him to do. He's aligning his life with the desires of God. He is sinking in with the Creator. He's like one of those old radios, finding the station finally, and beginning to hear the beautiful music of life. Now, what would Jeremiah have been doing otherwise? We know that he was a priest from Anatoth, not a really big place. He would have worked in a small town in a synagogue. He might have gone to Jerusalem a couple of times a year to do the priestly service in the temple. Those would have been the highlights of his life, and those are certainly important things to do. And service to God is definitely not about seeking notoriety. But that wasn't his call. Simply being a priest was not his call. Instead, God called him to be a prophet during a really, really tumultuous time in Jewish history. This was the time in history where the kings that were on the throne were beginning to rebel against the Babylonian Empire. And they were client states of the Babylonian Empire. They had signed a peace treaty and a cooperation treaty. They were paying tribute to the Babylonian emperor. And so when the king decided he didn't want to do that anymore, the Babylonians got a little mad, as you can imagine. And even though God and Jeremiah both said to the people, don't do this, you're breaking your promise, it will not end well, the kings and the people still did it. Until the last king, Zedekiah, who was finally removed from his throne. Jerusalem is leveled, and most of the town has been sent to Babylon in exile to live. Jeremiah runs off to Egypt. Strange place for a prophet to go. And begins prophesying hope to help encourage the people. And we now see his message through those hard times as so crucial to times in our own life. When we are sacked, destroyed, sent into exile, we don't know who we are anymore, and we hear God's voice in our ear, just like Jeremiah's voice back then, giving us a little ray of hope in the exile. And so Jesus, as he sets his mind and his face, we're told, to go towards Jerusalem, teaches in the synagogue on Sabbath. And he's got the nerve to do something good for somebody during church. This may seem odd to us because, if someone walked in and needed some prayer, we'd pray with them right here. Wouldn't be a problem. But there's all these commandments that tell us not to work on the Sabbath. It was people were killed for violating the Sabbath. And then part of how the Pharisees saw their world was that the Mosaic law was not just for the priests and for the elites of society, but instead the Jewish law the Mosaic law was for all the people. And so everybody had to follow the law. They were really a grassroots kind of movement, the Pharisees were. And so they saw God's law as being for all people. And so all people were involved in it, from the smallest little synagogue out in the middle of the boondocks to the temple in Jerusalem. And so it was important, critically important, to those Pharisees to make sure that everyone did everything just right. And so, when Jesus heals this crippled woman, this bent-over woman on the Sabbath, it's interesting that he isn't asked to heal her. She doesn't come in asking for healing. A lot of times we almost can see Jesus going through a town and people crying after him, hey, heal me. But this isn't what happens. A lady walks in. Jesus pronounces that she is healed, and he lays his hands on her, and she stands up straight. And that's when the trouble starts. Now, I hope you're in the mood for some good old victim blaming, because that's what the synagogue leader does. Notice, he isn't talking to Jesus. He doesn't say, Jesus, why did you do this? He asks the woman, why did you come here to be healed today? Don't you know it's the Sabbath? How dare you interrupt this rabbi? How dare you interrupt our services today? He doesn't point his comment at Jesus. He instead points his comment at the woman. But Jesus takes up her case quickly and authoritatively. He mentions that we would all do what's necessary for life, for our families, for our households. If we had sheep or oxen, we would lead them to water, even if it was the Sabbath, wouldn't we? People would have all said that. Now, I know not a lot of you probably have sheep or oxen, but the sheep or oxen were not just members of the family. They were critically important to their livelihood. The oxen and the assets were like 401ks or investment accounts, because they could not only give you dividends now, but they could be a source of income for your entire family for years and decades. They were critically important. And so if it was the Sabbath, you wanted to make sure your animals were healthy, even if it was the Sabbath. You would want to make sure your animals weren't thirsty, even if it was the Sabbath. And so Jesus uses this example to bust the conventions, to bust the shackles of their thought processes, and sets the woman free. He also challenges their understanding of Sabbath. And he invites them to think about compassion over legalism. If the Sabbath is made because God said it, if God rested and we should rest too, if we're supposed to experience that kind of freedom on the Sabbath, wouldn't we want everyone to experience God on the Sabbath too? If you would do something necessary for your animal on the Sabbath, should it not be right to free this child of Abraham, Jesus says, a member of the flock of God, to get the freedom she needs to be what God called her to be? In our salvation, through our baptisms, God calls us to be set free. Free to serve, free to love, free to live life as it was meant to be. It may bring you into prosperity, it may not bring you into prosperity. It may be a wonderful, amazing experience, or you may struggle with it, but still, God calls us to live life as it was meant to be free enough to do that. How is God calling you to free you from your conventional life? How is God calling you to be free from the conventions you see around you, from the box that you're in, from the box that you feel God is in? We humans are so guilty often of putting God in a box and saying that God can't move here, God can't move here, God shouldn't go here, God shouldn't love this person, or God shouldn't save this person. But instead, we're called to a life, to a faith that seeks to set us free. Free to love, free to serve, free to live life as it was meant to be. So be free from the conventional life.